Let me see if I can keep the high energy up here because it's very high energy tonight. Mauricio Espina is somebody that we've had our eye on for years with admiration because he's been doing this for now the 15th year. We've been involved in one way or another for many years, but finally last year we're involved on what I will say is going to be a permanent basis as the presenting sponsor of these awards, and we're very proud to do that because Mauricio is more than just an activist. He's done so many things that he just talked about. He's a doer, not just a lobbyist, he's a doer, and we're really enamored with doers. Just to let you know who TLN Media Group is, not all of you know who we are. We were licensed first as a channel, a single channel, Italian, Spanish, and English, mostly Italian and Spanish on one single channel in 1984. So that was almost 40 years ago. We're just entering our 40th year of operation. Since then, since that single channel, we've launched 7 owned and operated channels that you'll recognize: Univision Canada, Mediaset Italia, TGCom, Cine Latino, Teleniños, Telebimbi, Canada's first 2 heritage language channels for kids. And we were the founder and organizer, and still are, of the Salsa on St. Clair, TD, Salsa in Toronto, TD, Salsa on St. Clair Festival, which is entering its 15th year and is very well known among everybody in Toronto. So that's who we are. But now allow me to introduce our first keynote speaker. Daniel Tisch Echevarría is the new president and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. The OCC is the most influential provincial chamber in Canada, representing a diverse network of 60,000 members. Over his 30-year career, Tisch Echevarría has provided valuable insights to CEOs, boards, and government leaders. He was the CEO of Argyle Communications, Canada's largest management-owned communications consulting firm. He also co-founded Believe Co-Partners, an owner, operator, and builder of leading North American communications and marketing agencies. Earlier, he held senior policy and communications roles in the Government of Canada. This extensive background uniquely positions him to lead the Chamber into the future. Ladies and gentlemen, to drop his words of wisdom on us, Daniel.
Well, thank you so much, Aldo, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, the ambassadors and consuls general who are here tonight, the honorees, such an incredible list of nominees and finalists, and señoras y señores. Es un tremendo honor para mí ser invitado a dar este discurso esta noche, honorando a los 10 hispano-canadienses más influyentes del año. También quiero felicitar a todos los finalistas. Hoy celebramos no solo grandes líderes, sino también la fortaleza de la comunidad latina en Canadá. And I want to speak tonight about the resilience of this community, and also about the issue and the challenge of inclusion in Canada's economy, right? So it won't all be super serious, but I do have a serious message here. And I'm going to start with some stories about my own family, because that's, I think, where so much starts for everybody that I know of Latino background. This evening for me is a homecoming for a couple of reasons, right? The first, because I'm proud to be part of this community, having been born in Spain to Uruguayan parents. And second, because we are right now, where I'm standing, is about 3 minutes walk from the apartment building on Charles Street that my family came to more than 50 years ago when I was a little boy. So just a very, very short walk from here. So it is a kind of homecoming. So my father is Latino by culture, but not by heritage. He was from an Austrian-Hungarian Jewish family, and in 1939, he escaped the Nazi Holocaust with his parents. They lived in Barcelona. They had a very anxious year there, trying to find a country that would accept them. I'm not proud to say Canada said no. Canada did not accept Jews at the time, right? None is too many. But the country that said yes was Uruguay. Although it's very Uruguayan, because only if they came first class, right? So, you know, by ship. My grandfather had lost everything he owned except what he could carry. But at least they were alive. And some family members weren't so lucky. My father lost 2 of his grandparents in the Holocaust. They were never seen again. And so my father arrives in Uruguay in 1940. He's 6 years old. And so my father grows up speaking Spanish. He grows up Latino, right, in Uruguay. But for some reason, my father still speaks kind of like a Jewish Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? You know, he still has this Austrian accent. And so we'd be watching sports together when I was a boy, and he's like, "Dan, why are you still hoping the Blue Jays will win? They have terrible pitching." So he's a man of few words. And when I was growing up, he never spoke to me about his childhood trauma. He never talked to me about that. You know, I didn't even know that I was half Jewish until I was 7 years old. And I certainly didn't know about the Holocaust experience until I was in my mid-teens. So he came to Canada, like his father had gone to Uruguay, with very, very little. But yet 40 years later, my father was managing partner at one of Canada's largest architectural firms that literally shaped the Toronto skyline. So, my mother, mi mamá, es uruguaya, no, uruguaya, uruguaya. Está aquí con nosotros. Say hello, Mom. So, my mother is a force of nature, right? She is, unlike my father, she's extroverted. She turned 89 last month, and she climbed the stairs of the CN Tower for charity on her 89th birthday. Ella nació en un pueblo pequeño que se llamaba La Esperanza. What a wonderful name. Very close to the border with Brazil in Uruguay. Her father was a gaucho. Her mother ran a bodega out of their home. And she was the first in her family to go to the big city of Montevideo to go to university. And she loves learning about, even at her, even at her age, she loves social media, right? You know, but I got to admit that sometimes this results in some funny moments. And I hope, Mom, you won't mind me saying, you know, she initially thought the letters LOL meant lots of love, right? So a friend would put on Facebook, "I'm devastated, my aunt died today," and my mother would say, "LOL." So my parents decided to leave Uruguay just a few years before the military coup and the dictatorship. And those left behind suffered. One of my uncles was beaten and tortured. You know, he was a prominent soccer coach. And so my parents moved to Spain. And they lived there under another dictator, Francisco Franco. Life wasn't terrible, but you had to be careful what you did and what you said and with whom you kept company. And as colonials, they were not fully accepted into Spanish society. We came to Canada. I remember this. You know, I don't remember coming here, but I remember being very young in the early 1970s. The only place in the white Anglo-Saxon Toronto, this is before the big massive immigration, before the Vietnamese boat people, right? It was a very white Anglo-Saxon place, and the only place I ever heard Spanish was at home, right? And there was some pretty ugly racism. I remember once a Jewish classmate asked me if I was Jewish too. I lied and I said no. I remember begging my mother, "Please don't speak Spanish to me when you pick me up at school." Right? I'm ashamed, actually, to say that, you know, by these memories. But my parents' guidance was simple, right? And maybe some of you will relate to this. It was fit in, shut up, don't make waves, right? Play by the rules and the norms of this country, even if they aren't always fair, right? Is this familiar to some of you? For many Latino immigrants that I've met who came here from strife and from trauma, with these stories that we bring, self-reliance was and is a very prized value. And in my family, unfortunately, when we went out into the public domain, we denied our differences. And even though now I'm incredibly proud to be both Jewish and Latino, I still don't define myself principally by my demography, right? Nor do I believe fundamentally that demography is destiny. But yet we know that there are three things that predict one's socioeconomic future, right? The first is where you were born, The second is who your parents are. And the third is how hard you work. But there's only one of those things that we can control. And we now know that suppressing one's identity, particularly if it's accompanied by trauma, can have devastating consequences. Generation after generation after generation. Look at the stories that we are now learning, stories I didn't learn in school, and you probably didn't either, about the Indigenous experience in Canada. We now understand, we're beginning to understand the need for both truth and reconciliation. So, yes, let's, by all means, applaud, yes. So, it's a time of overdue self-expression, but also polarization, rapid judgment, a lot of emotion. And the question is, there are so many leaders in this room, right? So many incredible leaders. So the question is, how do we as leaders respond? Now, I've had the honor, as Aldo mentioned, of working with many leaders. In Ottawa, I worked for the Minister of Immigration and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And I'll tell you just a quick story. I remember going to Mexico City in 1992, and my job was to organize a signing ceremony between the Canadian and Mexican ministers for a memorandum of understanding on telecommunications cooperation between Canada and Mexico. And so I got a copy of the Mexican minister's speech, and I was looking at the speech, and then I realized there was a discrepancy between what the Mexican minister was going to say and what my boss, the Canadian minister, was going to say. And these were the years before mobile phones, okay? So back then, Mexico was looking at how do we, add landlines into more communities across the country, right? The Mexican minister's speech said Mexico's goal was to have telephone lines, it's amazing to say these numbers now, in 5% of homes by 2000. But the Canadian minister's speech said the goal was 7% by 2000. So I go, oh my gosh, and I run over to my Mexican counterpart, and I say, I show him the discrepancy, and he looks over and says, okay, bueno, 5, 7, bueno, ¿por qué no 7? Crosses out the 5 and puts 7, right, So sometimes progress begins with common goals, right? And in my business career, I came to Toronto from Ottawa. I bought a small 10-person business, communications business, and I'm proud, just at the corner of Bloor and Church, right here, southeast corner, my team and I grew it to become 10 offices across the country, the largest communications consulting firm in Canada. And I'm very proud of that. And also the most diverse, culturally diverse team in the industry, also with the largest Indigenous engagement and communications practice. Thank you. So it's been an extraordinary journey. But now as I take on this new role as CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, I realize, to come back to what I was saying a moment ago, that these are complicated and confusing and stressful times. We see growing risks from our changing climate. We see stubborn health and regional and economic disparities. We see division in our political discourse. We see images of violence and war on our screens. And I'm kind of troubled, too, that for all our progress and all the entrepreneurial success stories in this room tonight, there's a sense that in some ways we're moving backwards, right? That coming to Canada with a dream and making it come true, whether it's to own a business or even just to own a home, that dream is getting harder, not easier. And so our mission has to be not just to achieve prosperity, but to achieve prosperity that's inclusive and that's sustainable. And so that means supporting our businesses, not just large ones in Toronto, but small ones. And not just in Toronto, but in regional centers, in rural and remote and Indigenous communities. Whether it's through policy analysis or advocacy or partnerships or programs, we need to make local businesses stronger. Second, and this room is such a perfect, crucible of this, we have to work in partnership. We have to build partnerships, bringing together business and labor and academics and sectoral associations and governments to present realistic and actionable policy solutions. Me orgullece también que tenemos varias relaciones, nosotros, la Cámara tiene relaciones diplomáticas con cónsules de países latinos y hispanohablantes. Es muy importante. And so finally, I see an opportunity for leadership, not just representing the needs of business today, but looking a little ahead and thinking about the needs of business and workers and communities tomorrow. En un momento en el cual algunas personas son cínicas y hay críticas respecto a los negocios como fuerza para el bien social, tenemos la oportunidad de posicionar al comercio como facilitadores de soluciones de interés público. Yo hago el trabajo que hago porque creo que compartimos una gran responsabilidad. And I believe in the power of partnership, of relationships, and of communication, in the pursuit of mutual understanding, of truth, of trust, of social cohesion. That's why evenings like this are so important. That's why organizations like TLN are so important. And as I look at the list of nominees for tonight's awards, and I look at those who've been honored in the past, I don't just see great leaders, I see great stories. Great stories. Each one is unique. Cada uno de ustedes también lo es. But each of us has one thing in common, something I believe that my parents brought with them to that apartment on Charles Street 50 years ago. And that something is resilience. That's something Canada's Latino community has. It's something this country needs, hoy más que nunca. Muchísimas gracias por este gran honor. Felicitaciones a los ganadores. Thank you so much.